Hey, in this video, we're going to check out the BougeRV 40 amp MPPT Charge Controller. It's a new product that just started shipping in July of 2022. I just used it in my little solar DIY build. I'll put a link up there if you haven't seen it. But in this video, we're going to find out how well this guy performs and what it can do in a little more detail than what I went into in that video. So let's check it out. All right, before we get into the specific features and capabilities of this charge controller, let's take a step back and find out what you get when you unbox this thing. Got a manual, and I find BougeRV's manuals to be actually very nicely done. They're color, they're very graphical, and well thought out. So I'm sure this manual is very informative. And here's a installation template card, kind of gives you where the cutouts should be if you want to mount this thing on a wall or something. And you get looks like a little temperature probe so that you can do temperature compensation. This is absolutely essential if you're using this with a lead acid battery. The charge controller itself. So not sure what the weight on this thing is, but the whole housing on the outside and the back is cast aluminum. So it's very well made. It feels like a pretty good solid brick. And it does have a little magnetic door right here to access your terminal screw downs, and then you've got the temp probe connector on the bottom where this thing plugs in. So you don't really need a remote with this because there is a Bluetooth app, so we'll get into that as well, kind of make sure we understand what kind of functionality the app brings. It feels like a very solid unit. Does not feel in the slightest to be a cheaply made unit. So let's go check it out. Now, when you're getting ready to work with your solar charge controller, it's always best practices to, before you add power from the solar panels, to go ahead and add power from the battery first, to bring power up on the charge controller, and then you can add power from the solar panels. That's just safest for the charge controller. This particular charge controller does have safeties built in to prevent you from damaging it if you forget to do that, but just out of best practices, that's exactly what we're going to do. Let me go ahead and apply power. The power will come on here. It detected I'm running a 12-volt system. This LED light that's really bright right here, that particular one is telling me that the battery is connected. So what we have here is a little soft key on this glass panel on the side, just to the right of the LED. And if I press it, you can see the light comes on. I'm reading 13.4 volts, and I can page through. It's currently showing me that I have a 98% state of charge. As I may have mentioned before, you want to take that with a grain of salt because this is really calibrated for sealed lead acid batteries, which have a different voltage profile compared to their particular state of charge than does lithium ion. So I don't think that you typically want to trust the percentage here. It's often going to show you you're at 100% when in fact you're really not. When you're seeing this value, you need to take that with a grain of salt. Currently showing at 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Now I don't have the battery temperature probe plugged into the bottom, and the reason for that is that's primarily for temperature compensation that is essential for flooded lead acid style batteries. Doesn't really do a whole lot in this particular case for lithium ion, and it's something I'm going to talk about a little bit more in my closing comments. But as we page through that, you can see I have no error codes currently flashing. Right now I can do some limited configuration here by long pressing on things, changing from Fahrenheit to Celsius if I want, and do some battery type setting on things like that. So just be aware that you can do some limited configuration here, but mainly it's just a quick check type of display. Usually you're going to use the Bluetooth app. And the Bluetooth app you can connect as soon as you apply power to the charge controller. So notice it says 13.4 right now. I have found that the voltage reading here on the controller is about 1/10 of a volt high. But the difference of 1/10 of a volt, depending on your battery specs, if 13.4 versus 13.3, can mean the difference of anywhere from 10 to 30% of battery capacity. So that 1/10 could be significant. So you need to be aware that this tends to read a little bit high. And just to kind of prove that, and we're going to check that voltage in real time here. We're going to see what my multimeter says. Hopefully you can see that. and we are reading 13.30 volts. Now obviously I have one more digit of precision on my voltmeter, but this is 13.4 versus 13.30. Now one area where you might want to keep this differential in mind is if I'm reading a tenth higher here, when I'm setting my low voltage disconnect, where I don't want to run the battery past, say, 11 volts, when this says 11 volts, I'm probably going to be reading 10.9 volts actually on the battery with a multimeter. So I might actually want to set this to 11.1 volts so that it disconnects at that actual 11 volt reading from the battery. So hopefully that made sense, but I just wanted to point that out. Let's take a quick look at the manual here. As I mentioned, BougeRV does a really nice job on their user manuals, and I find this to be no exception. Let's jump over to page 2 here, and you can see on the left-hand side, there's some features listed. I'm not going to read the manual to you, but just be aware it does have a number of built-in protections, including reverse connection protection, open circuit protection, high temperature protection, overcurrent and short circuit protection. So if you momentarily exceed the maximum voltage on this unit from the solar input, which by the way is 150 volts, or the maximum input current, which is 40 amps, this thing can protect itself. So you obviously don't want to do that continually or regularly or by any significant margin, but if you just run over a little bit, it'll keep you from destroying the unit. So it's good to know that those protections are there. If we flip over a couple more pages, there's just a quick walkthrough of the app. We're not going to talk about that here because we're going to talk about that in real time. Then there's also a nice write-up on the working stages for both lithium and lead acid batteries, and I found that to be pretty informative as well. And then finally on this last pages 10 and 11 here, you'll see there's a chart for the error codes. If you ever happen to get one, that'll tell you what it's trying to say. And then here are the specifications. As I mentioned, it's got rated for 40 amps charging current, and its maximum solar input voltage is 150 volts. The no load loss, that's also an important one, is only 12 milliamps. So it's going to trickle 12 milliamps consumption from the battery if I'm not putting any kind of a load on the system, which I'm currently not. So right now I'm consuming 12 milliamps just to run the charge controller. So be aware of that. Let's take a quick tour of the ChargePro app, because that's really where you're going to want to do your monitoring and configuration, and it's pretty cool. All right, once you've downloaded the ChargePro 2.0 app, you can go ahead and launch it, and then usually the first thing that you have to do is go up in the upper right-hand corner in the little Bluetooth symbol, and you would click that, and I'm already connected, so it's asking me if I want to disconnect. I'm going to say no. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel this. But normally when you press that button, you'll be presented with a list of available Bluetooth devices. So as long as you're within a few feet of the BougeRV 40 amp charge controller module, it should show up in that list. And it will show up as PV Charge Pro in your Bluetooth device list. So that's the one you want to pick. And once you do that, it automatically connects up and starts showing you real-time data. Now the cool thing is, I'm actually upstairs in my office, and the unit is downstairs outside in the front yard charging. Presently, we're in the real-time monitoring screen. So you can see it shows state of charge 100%. You have to take this with a grain of salt because this is really calibrated more for lead acid batteries and not so much for lithium ion or lithium iron phosphate. And there doesn't appear to be a way that I could recalibrate this state of charge percentage for those lithium ion chemistries. So you kind of have to just rely on the battery voltage to be able to determine what your state of charge really is. But as you can see in real-time monitoring, if we just go down from one section to the other, on solar input, we're currently getting 14.2 volts. And that's important because that voltage number has to be higher than the voltage for the battery, which currently is set at 13.7. That's how much voltage it's getting from the charge controller. On the battery side, we're getting just a little over 10 amps and 140 watts. So in the bottom there, we've got today's running data. You can see my highest voltage was 13.8. I started at 13.3, and I have charged a total of 443 watt hours so far with a maximum of 300 watts. But on this bottom pane at the bottom, you'll see where I'm currently active in real-time monitoring. I can go to historical data, and it'll load up a plot of various parameters. You can see the little legend at the top kind of showing me what the various parameters are. Now you can click on the little wrench in the upper left-hand corner, and you can deselect some of the parameters if you want to sort of unclutter that plot display if you want. So I'll just deselect a couple of those and then go back, and you can see the plot display is a little less busy. And you can see since I've been goofing around with this, I've charged it a total of 3,210 watt hours. So I haven't had it for super long. And you can page through by date once you start logging a fair amount of history here. And if you prefer to see a bar chart style, you can click on that and it'll load it bar chart style instead. Then the last thing that you can go do here is you can go into parameter setting, and this is where you can see the current parameters. You can see I'm currently using a 12 volt system with a lithium ion battery type. Now this Li is actually appropriate for any lithium ion or lithium iron phosphate battery as well. So really this is the simplest way to set up the charge controller for a lithium ion battery type, because everything is already preset for you. You can go in and edit some of these individual parameters here, like the boost charge voltage or the over discharge voltage, which is important. If I wanted to maybe allow it to run down a little bit further, say maybe 10.8, I could do that. In order to do that, I have to unlock it first. So where it currently says locked there in the upper right, I can click on that, and it'll ask me to confirm that I'm unlocking the settings. Now once I do that, I could say go into my over discharge voltage parameter by clicking on that, and maybe I want to bring that down to 10.8, and you can see there on the left it's now 10.8. I can confirm, and now it'll stop charging when I have discharged to 10.8 volts. And I think the 10.8 is actually the recommended number for the ampere time battery that I'm currently using. So that's really about all there if we're using one of the predefined battery types. While we're in there though, I could select some other options. So you can see there are several varieties of battery type that I can select here. You can also, if you want to get into some of the more advanced features, go into the use or user battery type. I think that should actually say user. And if I click on that and say confirm, you can see now it exposes a variety of other parameters under advanced setting. So I can actually go in and enable or modify temperature compensation, for example, if I wanted to set up something. But you do really need to know what you're doing. So in most cases, you're better off just using one of the preset defined battery types unless you have a good reason not to. So really the only other thing that you can do in here is on the upper left-hand corner, you can go into the device information, and you could reload factory default settings, and you can clear your historical data if for some reason you want to start over. So that's kind of handy, I guess, if you ever need to do that. But that's really all you need to know about the app. So what's my bottom line on this new 40 amp charge controller from BougeRV? I really find that it's extremely well made, and it's very easy to configure, especially when you use the app. I think the presets are fantastic. There are a couple things, that I would probably wish that it did differently. The fact that it reads 1/10 of a volt high as compared to my multimeter and my little DC voltmeter that I used in my solar generator build is something that you have to take into consideration. I wish it were more in line with that. I was curious. I actually hooked up this really cheap PWM charge controller, and this thing actually reads 2/10 high. So the 1/10 high on there, at least between these two devices, is significantly better than 2/10 high. Now I will say that when I got this unit and unpacked it, it was clearly not a brand new unit. I think it was probably either a test unit or maybe a demo unit. And so it's entirely possible that it's just this particular unit that reads 1/10 of a volt high. So in any case, with any charge controller, I think it's really important to compare what you're getting on the charge controller versus what you're getting on a multimeter that you trust, just so you know if there is a bias one way or the other in the voltmeter reading. Now that said, there is one other thing that I wish this unit would do, and that is it does come with a temperature probe, but that's really just used for temperature compensation if you're using flooded lead acid batteries. It would be really nice if you could use it to monitor air temperature at the battery level and program a low temperature cutoff for lithium ion or lithium iron phosphate batteries, so that you're not charging them when the temperatures are freezing and you shouldn't be charging them. Now those two minor concerns aside, I really do feel like this product is a very well-made product, and I think I can highly recommend it. Now there is a discount code for the charge controller right now, and I'll put that in the description below if you want to go check it out. But it is only active for another day or two, so you might want to jump on that if you're interested in this. It's about 20% off, which I think equates to $30 off of the normal list price of $149. So feel free to check that out if you want to. And just be aware, it's a limited time deal. So if you found any of this information helpful, I really would appreciate a thumbs up on the video. It really does help with the algorithm. And consider subscribing if you're not a subscriber. So thanks. That's about all I got for you. Hope to see you in the next one. Until then, have fun out there. All right, in a minute or so, we're going to get into the configuration. Okay, cut. All right, before we get into the specific capabilities of the charge controller, So before we get into the capabilities of this particular charge controller, and also what the app that it... Right. Really? Cut.